Why do many Orthodox Jews, including Rabbi Tovia Singer, treat Paul as more dangerous than Jesus? It sounds strange, doesn't it? Jesus, crucified, rejected, condemned by the Sanhedrin, is often remembered by modern Jews as a misguided but well-meaning Jewish teacher. Some even admire his ethics. But Paul is viewed as the true founder of Christianity, the one who hijacked Judaism and turned it into a Gentile religion. British Jewish scholar Chaim Maccoby didn't mince words. He said, Paul was the founder of Christianity, not Jesus. Paul invented a new religion entirely. To many within the Orthodox world, Jesus is a tragic figure. But Paul is a threat, an architect of apostasy, a man who dared to say that righteousness could come apart from the Torah. Why? What did Paul do that made him more feared than the Messiah himself? The answer will shock you, and that is what I am going to reveal to you in this video. If you want to learn undiluted biblical and Christian truths, I invite you to subscribe. So what exactly did Paul do that made him such a threat? You see, Paul didn't just preach Jesus as the Messiah, he redefined what it meant to be in covenant with God. Paul's message was revolutionary. The law, the Torah, could not save. Righteousness, he declared, comes by faith, not by works of the law. This wasn't just a theological shift, it was a spiritual earthquake. In Galatians 3 verse 28, Paul boldly proclaimed, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." In Romans 3 verse 28 he wrote, "A man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law." And in Ephesians 2 verse 15, he said that Christ abolished in his flesh the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. But perhaps Paul's most shocking move was opening the gates of salvation to the Gentiles without requiring them to become Jewish. No circumcision, no kosher laws, no Sabbath observance. For centuries, Jewish identity had been marked by obedience to the Torah. Paul was tearing down that entire framework. To first-century Jews, this wasn't just unorthodox, it was explosive. He claimed that Gentiles, pagans, idol worshippers could be grafted into the promises of Israel by grace alone, no conversion, just belief. This wasn't a footnote in Jewish history, it was a direct challenge to the religious foundation of their world. To many modern Jewish scholars like Rabbi Singer, Paul is seen as the real founder of Christianity, the one who universalized the faith, abandoned the law, and welcomed Gentiles without requiring them to become Jews. And that's why Paul wasn't just debated, he was dangerous. This controversy around Apostle Paul didn't just start today, it started right in his time. As his message spread through the Roman Empire, winning over Gentiles by the thousands, Judaism faced a crisis. A version of their own scriptures was now being preached without the law, without circumcision, without the foundational marks of Jewish identity. This wasn't just a theological disagreement, it was an existential threat. In response, something remarkable began to happen. Rabbinic Judaism began to harden its boundaries. After the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the rabbis emerged as the new guardians of Jewish continuity. But their Judaism wasn't just the old religion continued. It was a carefully constructed defense system. Oral tradition, Torah shebe'al peh, was elevated to divine status. Halakha, Jewish law, was expanded and enforced with unprecedented clarity. The Mishnah and later the Talmud began to form. Why? To define Judaism against Paul's message. Jewish historian Daniel Boyarin explains it this way. Paul's universalism challenged the particularism that Rabbinic Judaism sought to preserve. Jacob Neusner adds, the rabbis rebuilt Judaism on a framework that could withstand the centrifugal pull of Christianity. In other words, Paul forced a reckoning. The rabbis had to protect the law by building walls around it. Clear lines, tight boundaries, and a firm separation from the Jesus followers. What emerged was not just a religion of the law, but a religion of resistance. Resistance to the idea that Gentiles could become part of God's people without becoming Jews. And at the heart of that resistance was Paul. The fear of Paul didn't die in the first century. It's still alive, especially within Orthodox Judaism. Today, it's not uncommon to find Orthodox rabbis and anti-missionary groups spending more time refuting Paul than Jesus. Why? Because Paul remains the greatest theological threat to Rabbinic Judaism. Jesus can be reinterpreted as a prophet, a teacher, even a misguided reformer. But Paul, his gospel strikes at the core of Jewish religious identity. That's why outreach ministries to Jews often avoid Paul at first. His name alone raises red flags. He's seen as the one who took Judaism and twisted it into something foreign, something dangerous. Yet ironically, that's also what makes his message so powerful. Do you know what is even more shocking? Paul didn't preach a foreign religion. He preached from the Hebrew scriptures. He quoted Abraham. He taught from Moses. He sounded deeply Jewish. But he drew a revolutionary conclusion that the Messiah fulfilled the law and that salvation was now open to all, by grace, not law. Anti-missionary figures like Rabbi Tovia Singer zero in on Paul. In his lectures and books, he calls Paul the true founder of Christianity and accuses him of distorting the Jewish scriptures. And here's the real tension. If Paul is right, if his gospel is true, then the entire rabbinic structure, 2,000 years of oral tradition, halakha, and rabbinic authority, comes crashing down. This isn't just a theological debate, it's a matter of survival. Paul isn't just a name in the New Testament, he's a living challenge to a religious system built in direct response to him. And that's why, to this day, Orthodox Jews fear Paul more than Jesus. But what if Paul was right? What if the man Orthodox Judaism fears most was not a traitor, but a witness? A Pharisee who didn't abandon his faith but fulfilled it. In Philippians 3, Paul lays out his credentials. A Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law a Pharisee, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. He wasn't some outsider. He lived and breathed Judaism. He studied under Gamaliel, one of the greatest rabbis of his day. He persecuted the early church with zeal. And then he changed, not because he hated Judaism, but because he believed he had found the very one the prophets foretold. Paul didn't reject the Torah. He saw its purpose fulfilled in the Messiah. He didn't abandon Israel. He opened the door for the nations to join Israel's promises. What if Paul's gospel isn't a corruption, but a continuation? What if his vision wasn't rebellion, but revelation? He saw a crucified Messiah rise from the dead. He saw the scriptures come alive in Jesus. He saw God's covenant explode beyond the boundaries of bloodline and law into grace, mercy, and faith. Maybe the reason Paul is still feared is because he saw something too powerful to ignore. So here's the question. What if the one they feared the most was the one who saw most clearly? So now we return to the question, why do many Orthodox Jews fear Paul more than Jesus? It's not about his personality, it's not about history alone. It's his message, a gospel that shattered boundaries, challenged authority, and claimed the Messiah had already come. Paul's words have echoed through the centuries, not because they were convenient, but because they were powerful, dangerous, liberating. Maybe Paul isn't feared because he was wrong, but because he was right. If this opened your eyes, don't stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Christian Chronicles. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.